Ah, everything in its right place.
I despise Chris.
The longer a series goes on, the more likely it's going to go off the rails at some point. It starts to veer away from those first few titles. It starts to get silly. You could also say these series jumped the shark for a time. Code Veronica is one of those titles. Sure, Resident Evil has always been silly, but here it really amps it up. From Wesker and his Matrix powers, to cross-dressing villains, to one of the most annoying characters around.
Don't worry, Claire. Your knight in shining armor is here.
While it's still a good game, of the fixed camera era of the Resident Evil titles, I rank it near the very bottom, just ahead of Resident Evil 0. Hell, of the mainline titles, I rank it near the very bottom. I do know Code Veronica has its fans. Perhaps it was their first Resident Evil, as at the time it was a Dreamcast exclusive. There are some enjoyable moments throughout Code Veronica, but it also contains playing frustrations that never bogged down the previous titles. For this video I'm playing the GameCube version, Code Veronica X. I used a Dolphin emulator with some texture packs, along with some tweaking to skip door load animations. There's also a fan remake that I will talk about at the end of the video. How did this game come together? The team wanted to port Resident Evil 2 to the Sega Saturn. However, the current tech made it very challenging. Instead, the higher up at Capcom suggested making something for the upcoming Sega Dreamcast. At the time, another team at Capcom was working on the side story with Jill Valentine. This would eventually become Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. There's always this contention if Code Veronica was supposed to be the quote-unquote true sequel and essentially Resident Evil 3. From looking through a few articles, it seems that Sony wanted to keep the numbered titles on their platform, hence why Nemesis was given a 3 to it. As the development team were tied up with Nemesis, most of the development of Code Veronica was outsourced. Development was mostly handled by a company called Flagship. They were formed in 1997 and received funding by Capcom, Nintendo, and Sega. They worked on a number of existing IPs, as you could see here. In 2007, they would merge under the Capcom umbrella. Nextech and XAX were also companies hired to help with the development here. To note, outsourcing game development wasn't an overly common practice at the time. I'd wager it helps explain how the game can really feel disjointed at times. While Shinji Mikami would oversee the project, do note he was also directing Dino Crisis around the same time, along with overseeing Nemesis. In 2001, wanting to hit higher sales numbers, they made Code Veronica X, an extended cut of the game. This was released on Dreamcast and PlayStation 2. This would also come to the GameCube a few years later, and that's the version I am playing. In Code Veronica, we start off as Claire Redfield, now rocking the mom jeans look. Keep those high and tight, Claire. It's been 3 months since the past title. Raccoon City has been nuked off the face of the earth. Looking for Chris, she ends up infiltrating an Umbrella facility in Paris. Here she pulls off some John Woo shit. The only thing missing here were some doves. Claire is captured and sent to Rockfort Island. While in her cell, the island's attacked and the T-virus is unleashed. We're freed and we're off to the races. Unlike the first 2 titles, there's no choose your character at the beginning, although there will be times in the game where we switch characters. Very early on here we'll run into Steve Burnside.
Wah! Wait, don't shoot!
Who are you?
Huh? You're not a zombie. Well, great. Wait right there. I'm coming over. Sorry about that little misunderstanding, but I thought you were another one of those
Shut up. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry. My name's Steve.
So, there's a lot to say about Steve here. None of it positive, but hold that thought for now. On the presentation front, as I mentioned earlier, I am using some upscaled texture packs, so it does look better than it does initially. Code Veronica marks a departure from past titles. There's no use of pre-rendered backgrounds here. While we can't control the camera, there are points where it'll follow us or do some dynamic shifting. While it doesn't have the same charm to the pre-rendered backgrounds, the environments are well detailed. Playing it now, they don't feel overly dated by any stretch. As far as the music goes, it's fine, but nothing that I say that really stands out compared to past titles. Although there's one track here that just swims in cheese. That happened during certain conversations with Steve. On the gameplay front, it's the standard tank control Resident Evil formula with a few tweaks. You can dual-wield pistols and either target one enemy or 2. Still, it's best to save these for some of the boss fights. Zombies are much more difficult to dodge this time around, and some will shuffle at you pretty quickly. However, the knife is super handy here. Slashing at legs works really well. They definitely bumped up the difficulty here compared to past titles. Fairly common to be running around with Claire hanging onto her side in a caution state. Although some of this difficulty does come to some frustrating design decisions. A great little addition is that if your inventory is full, if you go to pick up a herb, you have the option to just use it there. Although it would be nice to have the option to combine it with a herb in our inventory. In the bizarre case of being in one and not in the other, here there's a designated button to climb stairs. In Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, this wasn't the case. An engine issue? I'm not sure. Do recall that this was an external team doing most of the development. It wasn't a deal breaker or anything, but it's something to note. We have the normal mix of dogs and zombies, but also some new enemies pop up. One notable enemy is the Bandersnatcher. With their long reach, can deliver damage from afar. There's this nice touch with them of how they could get around quickly to get ahead of where you're going. Not just figuratively, but literally. It's too bad that their appearance is pretty silly. There are some decent jump scare moments here and there, although most fall into the predictable category. Weapons are mostly fine. The addition of a sniper rifle allows for some views in first person. There's an unlockable mode after you beat the game in which you can't play in first person, which is interesting. I've seen a dolphin hack that allows you to play the entire campaign in first person, although I haven't tried it myself. I do have to note the shotgun lacks a significant amount of oomph compared to previous titles. Level design Code Veronica is a mixed bag. The game here makes use of smaller interconnected areas. For example, with Rockfort Island, we have the prison area, the palace, the underwater area, the military training facility, and the private mansion. Each section is designed well for the most part, but they really ramped up on backtracking here. Backtracking is always something tricky to get right. Metroidvania games live or die in how well they get backtracking. And this has always been part of Resident Evil since day one. Previous titles hit that right balance of keeping backtracking to areas that are close together. Code Veronica, it's much more spread out. This is due to having a larger amount of areas with smaller designs. Even with the door skip hack enabled on Dolphin, there was quite a bit of annoyance of having to backtrack at points. As the game goes on, it does a better job of cutting it down, but still frustrating and something the series hadn't had an issue until now. While there are not a lot of puzzles in Code Veronica, I do have to give credit for having one of the better puzzles in the franchise, that being the Ashford family line puzzle. It gets you to sit down and think this one out, but also at the same time teaches you some of the lore, the backstory of the Ashford family. I wish more puzzles in the series would take this approach. On the note of Ashfords, let's talk about the story of Code Veronica and go through the major sections, so this is where spoilers come into play. Noboru Sugimura, a Japanese screenwriter brought in to work on the script of Resident Evil 2, returns to work on the story here. While he was the sole writer on Resident Evil 2, here he's joined by 5 other writers. I know writing teams have grown larger over the years, but that's always an issue. Too many cooks in the kitchen and you lose that voice. The plot in Code Veronica can be quite disjointed. I do think it was an issue of having too many cooks in the kitchen in regards to writing staff. As I mentioned earlier, this is where the series really starts to get silly. I mean, the series has been silly up to this point, but they really dial up the anime factor, for a better lack of a term. They really hammed up the voice acting. Again, it's always been that case, especially the first title, but that was more for different reasons. 2 and 3 have that B-movie cheese, but the voice acting direction was mostly fine. Here, they took the direction of really hamming it up, for better or for worse. Claire's still the same voice here as Allison Court, but yeah, you could tell that the voice direction, her delivery here doesn't have the same impact as it does in Resident Evil 2. Oh, and as I mentioned in my Resident Evil 2 video I did recently, it's interesting to hear in the comments about the big comfy couch being in America and other countries beyond just being the Canadian show. I know here in Canada we've had a few television exports over the years like Trailer Park Boys or Schitt's Creek. Now let's return to Steve Burnside. What the fuck were they thinking with Steve? He's got a really annoying voice and he's a whiny character.
Ow! My back! You're heavier than you look. Hurry up!
It's not mentioned in the game, but this ad for Code Veronica mentions he is Canadian. Oh my. Look at this ad. I wonder what Tariq Nasheed would have to say about this. I've seen it mentioned that at some point in time, Leon was supposed to be in the game instead of Steve. I mean, Steve does have some resemblance to him, especially with the hair. As well, Leon is an annoying character. The game would have been so much better if he were in it instead. When I revisited the 1998 Resident Evil 2 for my video on it, I forgot just how little flirting happens between Leon and Claire. This, of course, they changed for the 2019 remake. Here there's a number of scenes between Claire and Steve. These scenes are terrible. It's got really cheesy music and Steve is, well, Steve. Claire, you deserve so much better. That's why I'm never in a rush to help him out while he's suffering. There's so many scenes where I kept thinking, man, if Leon was here instead, this would have likely worked. There's this one in particular.
Thanks.
This could have been a great sexual tension moment with Leon being in that place, but with Steve, doesn't work at all. Here's a more recent example of a similar scene in which it works, because both characters involved are extremely likable.
You okay?
Yeah.
Code Veronica also tries to guess the care for Steve with the scene with his dad being a zombie, and learning about his ties with Umbrella.
No! Ah!
No, just doesn't work for me, Steve. I'm sorry. Life sucks and then you die. On Rockfort Island, we're introduced to the Ashford twins, Alfred and Alexia. Alfred is that mustache-twirling villain with a really annoying voice. Yet there's this goofy charm about it that I can't help but love.
Tell me, who do you work for? Who sent you? Have it your way, then. You're just a rat in a cage anyway. Despite all my rage, I am still...
We also make the discovery that he's cross-dressing as his twin sister. This is one of the funniest moments in the game. Having him wait to jump on us from the top of the bed is such a funny visual.
This must be...
What? No!
Wait a second. What just happened?
Wesker makes his return to the series, turning into a character straight out of the Matrix. Of course, there's also the super hammy voice acting, but you could tell the voice actor is having a great time with it. The way he says "I despise Chris" is just a classic.
I don't know what went on between you two, but you have him all wrong. My brother is not the kind of person you think he is.
I despise Chris.
So our goal for this section is to get off the island, so we have to get this plane ready to go. As mentioned earlier, it has a larger number of smaller areas than past titles, so there's a lot more backtracking. I do enjoy the more European architecture that they go for here. There's a section early on where you have to drop pretty much all your items. You just know something bad is going to happen at some point. Granted, I think they should have saved this until later in the game. At that point, we're used to having our equipment with us, so to snatch it away really brings up tension. A great example is near the end of Silent Hill 2. While in Silent Hill 2 it's much easier to avoid enemies, it is a great few minutes of taking away all your offense and defense options. Luckily for us, Steve knows how to fly a plane.
I hear Hawaii's nice this time of year.
You got it.
Now Steve has Claire in a bikini on his mind instead of mom jeans. Now comes an infamous boss that's caused a number of people to restart their game. Didn't do well with picking up ammo and saving it? Well, good luck. There's always that fine line of being challenging without veering into frustration territory. This fight falls into the latter category. Afterwards, Alfred takes control of the plane.
My apologies, but I cannot let you escape now.
Alfred! Cross-dressing freak!
Oh, this line. Imagine how game journalists would melt down over a line like this today. Steve? Steve, what are you doing? Why are you in this game, Steve? Oh, Steve. The next section of the game has us in an Antarctica base. So there's a missed opportunity here in regards to not really making use of the environment. I mean, we're in the Antarctica. Shouldn't we have sections of dealing with the cold? And depending on where this is located in Antarctica, it's going to be cold. Really, really cold. But I'm guessing from the way they're running around outside without showing any difficulties with the temperature, I'm guessing it's a warmer section of Antarctica. Could have been a nice new challenge for us to approach. Maybe we can only stay outside for so long. Perhaps the wind could pick up and we could barely see in front of us. Maybe we have to bundle up so we can't carry as many items with us. Otherwise, this section realistically could have happened anywhere. If you're going to pick Antarctica as a location, you might as well take advantage of it. This section is fine. It's nothing great, but it's nothing terrible. It's much smaller and more concise than before, but there's nothing overly noteworthy with it. There's a Nosferatu fight where we can make use of the sniper rifle. While not as annoying as the Tyrant on the plane, this can be a frustrating fight. Very easy to get swiped off the roof by the Nosferatu. Afterwards, Alfred frees Alexia from her cryogenic sleep as he passes away. Alexia stops Steve and Claire from escaping.
What is that?
At this point, we switch over to Chris, who's scaling up Rockfort Island. He's not quite at boulder punching mode yet, not on the Skittles as Jason Genova would say, but he's on his way. This section will have us going through Rockfort Island again, but there are some changes. This is what I found the most frustrating part of the game. There's a number of rooms that we'll revisit, but are destroyed so they have different layouts. It gets a bit difficult to hold in your mind of how this area was before and how it has changed due to the damage it has sustained. There were some parts where I knew where I needed to go, it just took a while with the changes that were made of how to get there. But there were also new areas that we could explore that were unreachable as Claire, so those were easy to keep in mind. Chris runs into his old nemesis Wesker, who pulls more Matrix shit, but lets Chris live to fight another day. Luckily, the Antarctica section of Chris is much better. We're blocked off from most areas that Claire had access to. Instead, we have a bunch of unexplored territory to go through. Something that hasn't been seen in the series since are these camera enemies. If we're spotted, hunters will be sent to our location. Thing is, it felt like they didn't really commit to this. It feels half-baked. If you're going to try something like this, either commit to it more or don't bother at all. In a bizarre case of fan service, there's a section of the base that's heavily modeled after the Spencer Mansion. I really don't know what they were going for here. Were they expecting fans to clap when they saw it? At this point, we could free Claire, and we get probably the best moment of the game.
Chris! I missed you so much.
I know.
This is pretty much the only time in the series that they get to spend time with one another. I mentioned earlier that Steve should have been replaced by Leon, but another direction they could have gone is having Claire and Chris spend a good portion of the game together trying to get out of their situation. Oh, and do notice how they talk about Steve.
Not yet. We have to find Steve.
Who's Steve?
He's a boy who escaped from that island with me. But then a monster attacked us and we got separated.
So that means Steve is still somewhere in this base?
I'm sure of it.
Claire will never let Steve have a chance at continuing that Redfield bloodline, and there is no way Chris would ever approve. And Chris, of course, does never get to meet Steve as well. One of the frustrating design decisions I've seen get mentioned for a good reason in Code Veronica is switching of characters. If you're not careful with the items you're carrying, you won't be able to access them with the other character. I'm sure there's been a number of players who've dropped all their equipment thinking a switch would happen, only to end up in situations where they had nothing available. I'm wondering if a certain Let's Player had this issue. Let's take a look.
Band. Definitely gonna save my game. I think I'm just gonna put everything in here. I don't have any weapons. Great.
Returning as Claire will free Steve, who has been infected and chases after us. Good luck, hope you have a healing item with you or else this part's pretty much impossible. And then probably the only good moment with Steve, even being infected, he's able to keep his humanity to save Claire.
I'm glad that I met you. I love you, Claire.
Steve?
And then he dies, and I simply couldn't care less. In a series that's been mostly really good at giving us likable characters in a short period of time, Steve stands out. There was never really a moment where I was invested in him, even when they tried to build empathy for him. The anime cheese gets amped up with this fight between Alexia and Wesker. The game does suffer by having both Alexia and Wesker fighting to be the main antagonist here. They either should have committed to one or the other. The last boss here with Alexia is really annoying with a bunch of shit constantly flying our way. Chris and Wesker have a cutscene fight with both living to fight another day. Chris and Claire escape and roll credits.
Chris, promise me. Please promise that you won't leave me alone again.
I'm sorry, Claire, but it's not over yet. There's still something we've got to do.
You mean...
Yeah, it's payback time. We've got to destroy Umbrella. Now, let's finish this once and for all.
I haven't really delved much into the plot here because there's not a whole lot to say about it. I mean, Resident Evil has never been known for super strong plots, but here it really lacks focus than the previous titles have. It's one of those cases as the series looks to expand and bring in new factors into play, it loses some of that focus. None of the new characters added here are really compelling, and as far as the lore goes, it does add more to the history of Umbrella with the Ashfords, but nothing that really has far-reaching consequences. The only reason I can think that people would rate this game highly is if it was their first title in the series as being Dreamcast owners. I can't really think of anything that does better than the prior 3 titles before it. Being able to pick up a herb and use with a full inventory is nice, that's about it. It's nice to have the Redfields get some time together, but that's still far too short. Thankfully, the remake of the first title would help put the series back on track for a time. So with all the remakes that Capcom has been doing with the series, will they do so for Code Veronica? I doubt it. However, there is a fan project in progress that you can currently play. It's being done by just a couple of devs at the moment. You can play a portion of the first part of the game. It's in the style of the 2 and 3 remake. It's still very much a work in progress. Aiming feels super floaty, movement is a bit awkward, but does show promise. It's also proof that there seems to be no real plan for a Capcom remake. And why is that the case? A few years ago, there was a fan remake of Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 2 Reborn. However, this got shut down by Capcom due to them making their own remake. Capcom has been mostly good with fan projects for Resident Evil. I've done a couple of videos on the topic itself. There was a bit there where the team working on the Code Veronica remake sent some cryptic tweets out that thought maybe this project would meet the same fate. Maybe Capcom was working on it. However, it turns out that one of the developers had their graphics card bite the dust, so the project has been pushed back some time. So if you are interested in checking it out, I've provided a link in the description if you want to try out the demo. So all in all, while a good game, Code Veronica sits near the bottom of the mainline titles in my mind. It makes a number of design mistakes that never occurred in past titles. It has a plot that expands more in the lore, but it's the point where the series really started to get silly. Granted, the series has always been silly, and still is to this day. But this really got the series going in a direction that could have caused it to one day to burn out or fade away. Sure, we would get the Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 4 to keep the series going for years, but it wouldn't really be until Resident Evil 7 many years later that it would take the series more back to its roots. Thanks for watching, everyone. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, check out the Discord. If you're interested in supporting the channel further, I have a Patreon so you can appear in the credits here. Thanks for coming by, everyone. Boulder Punch out.